Right, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Hope you can hear me. I'll check with Balaji again. Good evening, Balaji, and good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Good evening, sir. We can hear you.
Okay, good. Right, and thanks to Mr. Sri Balaji of NPTEL for setting this up. He's our host and technical expert. Okay, good to see you. And now this session is really for you to bring questions generally on the topics we've covered so far. I think we've covered 5, but anything you want to ask about the course, raise the question either in conversation or put a question on the chat. Okay? Excuse me. If you have no questions, does that mean you're convinced by everything you've heard me saying on the course? Can I reach that happy conclusion? You may have to ask to unmute. Just put a request in. I'll just call Balaji. Right, yes. Rishi, you've asked about Catalonia. Okay. Have you got a particular question about Catalonia? Do you remember which chapter it's in or which topic it comes under?
Hello, sir. I'm Balaji here, sir. Do you require any assistance?
Well, I'm not getting any sound back from the other participants. I don't know if there's anything I should do here.
Yeah, Sham or anyone else, can you just give a sound check, please, so that we can check whether...
Good evening, Professor.
Sir, can you hear them? I can hear it, sir.
I can hear you, Balaji, but I can't hear anyone
good evening,
else.
Professor. Can you hear me now? I'm Sham.
Yes, I can now. Thank you. Yes, Sham, I can hear you. Yes.
Professor, I have submitted a question via Google Form. Are you able to view it, or should I ask the question here again?
Give me the question now, and I've got certainly a question about Catalonia, which Rishi has asked. But ask your question. Ahead. Okay. Well, Sham, you could write it in the chat box on the right-hand side if you like, where it says chat. If you click on that. But I'll answer Rishi's question about Catalonia. Yes, it's under anarchism. What is it that's particularly that you would particularly like addressed? It helps me if you have a question. It doesn't have to be very specific.
So may I ask my...
Go ahead.
It's actually regarding the conservatism topic that you have discussed in week 2.
Yeah.
So you have mentioned that the Swatantra Party founded by C. Rajagopalachari in 59
Mhm.
was in response to the socio-economic changes brought in by the Nehruvian Mahaladonji's economic model. So my question is that if such a political party like a Swatantra Party
Yeah.
was to revive again, what would be their contemporary relevance, given that we have opened up, India has opened up the economy in 1991, and most of the national parties propound conservative ideas. So that was my question.
Sure. Sure. Both good questions. I'll take the Catalonia one first. Catalonia is a very interesting example. Have you read the chapter in the book or the transcripts?
No, sir. I have just watched those videos.
Right. Okay. Because when you have a question like
it was
this,
difficult to read
sure.
those things.
Yeah, I will address the point that you've raised, or to address your question. But when you have a question like this, go back to the transcripts, right? Or listen to the passage again. With this kind of subject, we never get it the first time. And my own professor told me that when he interviewed me for a place to read philosophy. Said, we never understand a work of philosophy the first time we read it. And then what we're doing is very serious political philosophy. Or I hope it comes across like that. Okay. Catalonia is very interesting. Spain was in deep political turmoil in the early 1930s. And in Catalonia, the farmers and workers, anarchist, if you like, cooperative, took over the provincial government. Catalonia, if I'm not mistaken, is one of the main, is a large northwestern province of Spain, Spain as it stands today. Now, they made a huge success of it. And even the smaller landholding farmers who are in most countries, I say most countries, traditionally very conservative and very hostile to the idea of cooperative sharing of production and generally voluntary sharing of benefits and profits and so on, generally voluntary. Even they joined in. Now, at the time, Franco's fascist forces, almost certainly with help from the United States and the United Kingdom, they did help later on with warships off the coast. Now, a bitter civil war broke out, but the point about Catalonia is that it was self-governing. Barcelona, the city, remember today, Barcelona Football Club is still a cooperative. It's owned by the fans and the players. So it was a huge economic success and proves the value of cooperation and collaboration with as many as possible, involved in thinking about what they were doing, making the decisions. There's plenty of evidence for that, as we shall see later on, for the value of that, as we'll see in citizenship and republicanism at the concluding topic. But of course, well, as we know, the broadly left anarchist-inspired resistance to Franco was defeated, and Spain became a genuine fascist state from 1939 to 1975. Now, for example, the transport system of Barcelona was run by the workers, ran extremely well. So it is the remarkable shining example of how well anarchist societies can do. And the impact of Spanish anarchism and a strong tendency towards anarchism on the French left still run through left and social democratic thinking in Spain and France, more in Spain than in France. This means caution about authority. This means always, wherever possible, discussing what we'll do, reaching a decision, trying to reach agreement over decisions. This doesn't mean decision is impossible. They do. Catalonia is the outstanding success of it, and it was brutally suppressed when finally, the broadly anarchist movement against Franco was defeated. Zainab, you had a question. Have you a particular issue over anarchism that you want to raise and discuss here? Well, think about it for a minute. Meanwhile, I'll address the question we have about conservatism. Okay, well, you mentioned the Nehruvian Mahalanobis model. Be careful about using this term models. Look at the specific policies. And one of the things to remember is that there were severe tensions and disputes about the kind of democracy that India would be. And these, of course, grew much more intense as in the 1920s, as self-government of many, many kinds became a simple reality for India. The colonials knew that the empire was over by 1918. 1 million volunteers had fought. Volunteers had come from India and fought for the war, fought in the First World War. And the colonials knew it was over. They kept quiet about it, lied about it, even to their own publics. But the point for us is that, and you'll find this in the fundamentalism topic, again, we'll mention it there, democracy very broadly secularizes society because we, the public, are the ones who ultimately decide what the politicians will do. We hold them to account. And this means that we need to think about all aspects of our society. Democracy by itself brings a broad secularization of everyday practice. You look at Western Europe after the war, almost all of these are social democracies. Society has got highly secularized. People still, religion does still have a very important place in people's lives, but the form of it is very different. And it has far less of a only an occasional major part in deciding public affairs. It does happen from time to time, I repeat, time to time. So this does mean that people of a conservative disposition, particularly if they're very strongly socially conservative, live in a very uncomfortable relationship with democracy. And that was one reason, I've said this in the chapter, or I've indicated it if I remember rightly, why the Swatantra Party was founded. It didn't last long. I'm trying to remember the exact reasons it collapsed. I can remember when it was founded, and when relatives of mine would read its journal, which came out I think once a week or once a fortnight. But the point is that social conservatism isn't just social conservatism. It translates into politics, and social conservatives are often deeply nervous about the idea of public legitimation. You'll find this in a later chapter as well. The founders of the United States, the framers of the Constitution, were extremely nervous about the popular vote. They were largely merchants and traders and slave owners, don't forget, and wanted political rights for themselves against the old European aristocracy. This was one of the motivations for founding the United States. But they were very nervous about what they considered an ignorant mass. And you can see why social conservatives are, with their sense of natural order, are nervous about the idea of democracy and the vote and ordinary members of the public being involved, standing for election, making decisions, and so on. I hope that addresses your question. If it doesn't, come back via the forum, please, or ask again, as we talk. Hope that helps.
Yes, sir, it does. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and have a look at the chapter again. Have a look at the listen to the lecture again. We always have to do that with this kind of subject. If we don't get it, go back over it. Yeah, even a few minutes either side.
Hello, sir.
Yes. Good evening.
Good evening, sir. So my question was like, isn't anarchy confined to a smaller population? Because voluntary organization and voluntary work is possible only with a limited number of hands, people working for an ideology or even a work. But if it's a larger population and if they have factors of ideologies that they have to work upon, wouldn't in that scenario we would need an organization or few people to hold them accountable or give them basically ideas. I'm sorry for the background noises.
No, don't worry.
Yes, so that was my not exactly a question, but rather a doubt that wouldn't anarchy be specifically only to a smaller population, because
Good question.
it wouldn't work on it wouldn't work on larger population.
Good question. Don't forget, anarchism isn't just about everyone sitting together and saying, oh, let's all do this. It is, in its strongest forms, it involves being very clear about the public nature of our decision-making processes and about the widest possible public participation in them. Catalonia is the outstanding example, but you'll find anarchist tendencies in a great deal of the way the French state is organized. For example, or even, believe it or not, the German state, the constitution of today's Germany, or what was West Germany and is now Germany, was designed by the occupying powers after the war. Much of it was written by them. They were very concerned to prevent the concentration of power in one party or in one person. By the way, that's an issue we face in the United Kingdom today. We haven't got a constitution. That's another separate issue. But anarchism has as much to do with the ways we create authority and the ways we hold it to account, and how well we inform the public about what we do and how well we keep informed. It has to do with things like transparency in government. For example, how much of the Official Secrets Act could be abolished? An awful lot of it could, right? In most countries, believe it or not, and in some countries, in the United States, Congress, that is the centrally elected parliament, it's called the Congress, as you know, the Senate and the Representatives, two chambers, has, if I'm not mistaken, access to every official document. If they want it, if it's particularly sensitive, a committee of Congress can see everything. The point then is for us to be clear about the extent to which we, the public, are informed about the processes and the kinds of access we have to decision-making processes. This is starting to happen. I mean, even in the UK, for example, if a petition on an issue gets 100,000 signatures, Parliament has to debate it. Now, okay, we have a very top-down state here with extraordinary concentrations of power in the Prime Minister. But the point is that anarchism is as much about our sense of the public space as anything else. Going to an official body and saying, look, this isn't working, this is the problem we have, being taken seriously. It's about as much about a sense of human nature as anything else. If we're reasoning beings, then our capacity to reason and reason effectively must not be limited. We must have access. So the ways organizations work and the ways we create and delegate authority are have got a particular character in anarchism. Catalonia is an outstanding example. Absolutely outstanding. I hope that helps.
But sir, wouldn't that be a part of democracy, like what democracy preach, that the people have all the right to question the authority, question if any laws and regulation are passed down by the government authority, people have the right to oppose it or sign petitions and bring it to the government that we have an issue. But anarchism, as much as I've read and understood, is somewhat against democracy of having.
Take a look at the passages on what's broadly been called left anarchism, and have a look at that. Have you looked at the worked example? I think I've mentioned the Anderson and Hill paper, where these wagon trains going across the United States in the 1850s and 1860s devised their own organization. Right? Yes, they were fairly small bodies, but Catalonia. In a sense, Catalonia terrified even the other existing Western democracies, not just fascism, not just the fascists of Franco, because when people start making their own decisions, they tend to make much better worked out decisions for wider benefit. British Columbia, I don't know if I mentioned this in the anarchism chapter, their simple majority electoral system, the same as is used in Indian general elections, in UK general elections, and in almost everything in the United States except the presidency, had some very peculiar results. I think a party won the popular vote heavily and lost the British Columbia Provincial Assembly. So the Provincial Assembly set up citizens' assemblies to discuss and devise a better electoral system. That's exactly what they did. So civil service help was provided, but people came together, and the more they got to know, the better the decisions they made. He eventually proposed a very fine system. I can't remember exactly, but I think the two major parties effectively put a stop to it. I can't remember exactly why it failed, but in the end, the existing politicians did find it very difficult accepting this. Similarly, in Iceland, the public wrote a new constitution after they'd had a lot of political problems with the two major parties. Those two parties then killed off a series of very sensible proposals for a new constitution for an entire country, written by the public. And the two major parties killed it off on a technicality. I think this may be in the Republicanism and Citizenship chapter. But anarchism really is a way of making our processes as public as possible and of having effective agency in them. I've got examples in my own street. It's a quiet, suburban street, quite a mixed neighborhood, people of different social classes and so on. And we had these lovely Victorian street lamps, beautiful, I suppose they would have been steel of some kind, ornamental street lamps. One day, they've just sawn down, replaced with straight black metal piping and very, very powerful, I think CFL or LED bulbs. They're very unpleasant. We actually put extra curtaining to stop them, to make sure our room was dark enough at night to sleep in. So I contacted the council, or tried to. I had the impression that somebody fiddled a deal. I don't know if there's actual corruption, but they said, we can put dimmers in. Well, why didn't they blanking well ask us first and listen to us? We've had another example recently because parking, of course, in most Western countries is really an issue. And the council are proposing to make a certain area near the parish church. By the way, it was designed by Gilbert Scott, who designed the Senate building at the University of Bombay. They're proposing to make that area a no parking zone, double yellow lines on the road. And all of us in the street, our neighbors came and said, would you, participate? We all did. And the council backed down. Now, an anarchist would say, surely that is what it is to get people involved and to listen to them. One of the difficulties with existing democracies is that, yes, we have participation, but how much do we actually participate beyond voting every few years? And even if we do, certain electoral systems seriously restrict the range of representation in our assemblies. There are other systems, but we don't need to go into that in detail, proportion systems and semi-proportional ones. I hope that helps. Anarchism isn't easy. I agree.
Yes, sir. I recently read an article in which regarding Indian democracy that it said that usually the government committees that are formed for any community or any laws have committee members that usually do not represent the committee. So it's outsiders making laws for the committee or the community. So anarchy and democracy could work in that scenario very well. If the committee members or the community members come together with the government and form a committee and have their problems raised, and together the solution is formed, I think as much as I feel, the anarchy and democracy could be a better blend.
Well, yes, I mean, that's a very good point. Remember, democracies work differently depending on their electoral systems. I shouldn't go on about that. But there are electoral systems which provide much wider ranges of representation in government, right? In the elected assemblies, we elect assemblies and then the government is reformed from there. Germany is a good example. France at regional level is a very good example. And so on. Proportional and semi-proportional systems do give much wider representation. And it does mean we don't often get single party government. Germany hasn't had single party government for donkey's years. But the point is the two major parties, yes, they do form coalitions, but today in the provincial states, I think the Greens hold several of the major provinces of Germany, the Länder, or they're called the Land, or in plural Länder. Now, that wouldn't happen under a simple majority electoral system. The public have long been light years ahead of the politicians on green issues. So an anarchist response would be, under different systems of association representation, we, the public, would have far more effect expressing our concerns and discussing them to reach the best decision and then getting them implemented and overseeing the implementation. Yeah. Well, that's anarchism. I'm putting an optimistic view of it, but Catalonia shows that it can be made to work. I hope that's a response to you. There are no easy answers in this subject.
So I'd like to ask a question.
Yes, go ahead.
So you talked about Marxism during your course, and it was very interesting. But I frequently face a problem, with some of my friends and other acquaintances. They tend to ask, what is the difference between communism and Marxism? And certain people who know a bit about communism, they tend to further ask, what is the difference between Marxism, communism, Maoism, and Stalinism? So all of these are quite they have their roots in Marxism, but to a layman, how would you explain the fine differences? Like you had explained for fascism and Nazism, but Nazism, the racial segregation part included in it. But then for communism, Marxism, and the other latter two that I mentioned, to a layman, how would you explain the difference between the four? A basic point.
Yeah, sure. Good question. First of all, remember that the distinction between fascism and Nazism it's a disputed one. Yes, Nazism did have a very explicit theory of racial hierarchy, but all fascist doctrines have such theories, right? So it's a disputed point. On that difference, I take no position. I'm indifferent as to whether we consider Nazism separate from, say, Italian fascism or other forms of fascism. But we will find doctrines of purity by descent in a great many fascistic ideologies and a great many fascistic tendencies and parties. But let's get back to your question about Marxism. Right. First of all, give me a minute, please. I'll put my table lamp on. It's getting very gray outside. It's midday and it's sort of half light. Right, I hope that's better. Okay. Right, you remember the lecture was on Marx, specifically the main points in Marx and his analysis of this emerging new force, industrial capitalism. Both Marx and Adam Smith think very similarly about it. And what I set out to do in the lectures and in the book and the transcript, obviously the transcripts, was to explain how Marx shows the inner workings of capitalism or commodity production, this mighty new force which transformed the world very fast. It is systematic, and the generation of profit is systematic from the surplus labor, the unpaid labor of workers. And that's covered in the chapter. Yes, later in the chapter, later in the topic, I have touched upon the differences between communism and socialism and different forms of Marxism. Very good question. The first thing we must remember is that Capital, volume 1 of Capital, was only the first in a series of 6 that Marx was planning to write. And if I'm not mistaken, he was planning to conclude by looking at the organization of the state possibly in a post-capitalist society. But he died before he could do that. Volumes 2 and 3 are notes which were collected after his death and published. They're tough to read. Volume 1 of Capital is accessible. Okay. By the way, I should add, I did my end of my second year undergraduate dissertation on volume 1 of Capital. The topic was suggested to me by my sociology tutor who had done the same degree as me, philosophy and sociology. But one difficulty we have is that Marx gives us the greatest analysis of the workings of capital yet written. He sees how the inner logic of it leads in certain directions. For example, automation, eliminating the worker, the tendency towards financialization. We live in the middle of a financialized global economy. And I say financialized. The actual paper holdings in the world today, maybe even in 2010 years ago, they were about 12 times the actual value of produced goods. And what it's like today, I really can't imagine. But we must remember that even in the Soviet Union, even just after the revolution, there were significant disputes about the organization of authority and political power and responsibility. Georgy Plekhanov. Now, unfortunately, I discovered these fascinating arguments after I published the book, and there's some very good new work coming out on Marx. Plekhanov had an argument, had a row with Lenin. He lost. Plekhanov, I think, gave up politics, all but gave up. And he said, instead of a dictatorship of the proletariat, we have dictatorship over the proletariat. Right? And of course, anyone who's read anything serious about Lenin will be very, very cautious about his instinct for power. Now, this happened, of course, in China, where Mao Zedong was undoubtedly a mighty leader, but let's have no illusions about the fact that he and Stalin were extraordinary calculators and wielders of power, and prepared to be extremely brutal and ruthless in their use of power. Now, one of Marx's great horrors about capitalism is precisely how it, and I've said this in the lecture, how it crushes human creativity and energy and redirects human energy or tunnels it to its own purposes. Well, yes, if you look at the organization of China, it's still broadly Maoist, even though there's a claim that the economy has been supposedly liberated. So, and it's a free market economy. It isn't quite. China still is a command state. The Soviet Union, well, was certainly a command state. And at times in the early 70s, it looked as though the economic advances would be accompanied by political relaxation. Leonid Brezhnev had no intention of that, and reestablished a very rigid form of top-down Communist Party dictatorship. It was a dictatorship, for all that people might have claimed otherwise. So what you'll find in the book is, or in the lectures, is that I've looked at or given brief accounts of the different forms that political movements and that states supposedly inspired by Marx have taken. Now, the problems they've encountered weren't easy, absolutely not easy. And some of the responses were truly terrifying. The class of small landholding peasants is noted for moral, political, and social conservatism. In the Soviet Union, they exterminated them. It was called the dekulakization. Kulak is a small landholding peasant or farmer. It was utterly horrible, right? I don't think anything can justify it, right? So that was done. Yeah. Now I hope that helps you to think about your point. It is a very good point. I would suggest have a look at the book. Have a look at the book and see if you can.
Yes, sir. Okay.
From it to answer your friend's points.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Have a look also. Have you got access to the EPW, the Economic and Political Weekly?
Unfortunately, no, sir.
Right. Maybe through your college, if you're studying in the college or university.
No.
Okay. It's just that if you have store access, you could read the EPW. I mention this because I didn't fully answer a question about people's organizations. My former academic colleagues, Karen Coelho and Vijay Bhaskar at MIDS, MIDS in Chennai. I still call it Madras, I was born there. So please bear with me if I do, please bear with me. But they've written about political organization in slums. And they came up with some surprising findings. People are often very active and much less dependent on political patterns than we might think. So take a look at that. There's a very good paper, I think, on the political left and Marx in the EPW from about 15 or 20 years ago. I'm trying to remember the title. Maybe I'll post it up on the forum. And then if you get the chance, you can have a look at that. Yeah, hope that helps.
Yeah, sure, sir. Thank you.
Okay, I should go back to a question one of you raised about the kind of democracy that India is. Yes, there were severe tensions and arguments about this in the 20 or 30 years leading to independence. and during in the Constituent Assembly debates, which are all publicly available. They're on the net. Now, the social elites of India, it's not an easy thing to say or to recognize, were the bitterest opponents of the universal franchise. They were almost overwhelmingly of the Hindu upper caste, and they were horrified by the idea that people they almost considered subhuman would have something as politically authoritative as the vote. A great many electoral systems were discussed. I think Gandhi and possibly Nehru and a great many others favored some kind of proportional system, not quotas for communities or faiths or classes or occupations, but a proportional system. This was defeated in Constituent Assembly, and one of the arguments put, which won the day, was that proportional systems where you rank your candidates in order of preference were too complicated for the Indian voter to understand. You may not know this, but that was exactly the same argument that had been put by the colonials when even limited voting systems were discussed and implemented in India. So, that is, an anarchist would say, what the devil are you playing at? What do you mean ordinary people can't understand? Right? What do you take us for? So those are the kinds of issues that arose. In the end, India became, as you know, appeared at independence as committed to a republican social democracy with the state as the major supporter of the economy. This was true all over Western Europe, and it is still much truer than we realize. What's happened in industrial countries, particularly the English-speaking ones, is that the state's funding and support has been redirected to private enterprise, to support private enterprise. Right? For example, at the beginning of 2019, the Indian Express carried a front-page headline talking about colossal sums being put in by the central government to support the private sector. But if the private sector can't stand by itself, surely the private sector's own logic says it should collapse and better organizations, better companies should emerge. So the state hasn't disappeared, it's redirected itself, right? And we then need to think, well, what kind of state is that? And that's back into our discussions and arguments around ideologies. I hope that helps. Right, one or two more questions here. Do come back to me if you feel that if you feel that you want to cover an issue in more detail than I've given you here. Right, got a question for one of you, Rishi, is it? Is Britain actually capitalist or socialist? Right, very good question. Have a look at, have you read the chapter on liberalism? Have a look at that, because I spent time on what's called modern democracy, modern liberalism, or Keynesian liberalism. We have a system which has become very heavily financialized in the last 40 years since the election of a Tory government with Margaret Thatcher at its head. And yet, well, okay, we do have a free National Health Service, and I've covered this in the book. You'll find it in the chapter on liberalism. At the end of the war, 1945, virtually all, the devastation in Western Europe, which we fear we might face again, was truly terrible. The state, the wartime command economy of the UK had worked brilliantly well, as in the United States, and I've covered this in the book. A Labour government was elected with a huge majority, 191 seats in Parliament, on a clear mandate to protect people against the worst effects of the free market, because the Depression years had been truly terrible. One of the greatest figures in that was a man called Nye Bevan, grew up in a mining village. I've covered this in the book, by the way, and in the transcripts. The health system there wasn't a system. Before the war, everybody had agreed we needed a public health service. Nye Bevan designed it. Sir Joseph Bhore, an Indian civil servant, designed something very similar, which went further in India. Bhore wanted to combine preventive and reproductive care. But Nye Bevan put this through Parliament with, overwhelming approval, and we still have it. It is being eaten away, privatized bit by bit, with more and more services now being offered by contracted firms. And frankly, they just aren't as good. So we do have a genuinely socialist public National Health Service. The ideas are genuinely socialist. We all pay our taxes, we share the risks, we share the benefits. It is still the case. If I needed a serious operation, I'd go straight to hospital. That's it. Get treated. Not a penny to pay. Okay, that's still broadly the case. I think that if the public were better informed on what our current government had to do with they've always hated it. The Tories voted against it 22 times in the drafting stages in 1946 and 7. If the public knew what was being planned for the NHS, they would never let the Tories back in. But that's another matter. Okay. Yes, we too have redirected our funding. The enormous amount of government support that goes to the private sector. Look, in the financial crash of 2008, which didn't affect India nearly so badly, because 3/4 of India's banks are public sector. People were even taking their money out of private banks and putting them back in public sector banks in India. The public sector bank I'm still with, I'm kind of winding up, are absolutely excellent, right? Clear public service remit, efficient, helpful, work very, very well. And there we are. But the point is that in the Western world, the financial crash of 2008 to 10 or 7 to 9 resulted in the United States and the United Kingdom putting something like $3 trillion in to rescue a bunch of banks who had come close to crashing the world's economy. Now, why should we rescue them? Why didn't we nationalize them? Right? Come on, you do what we say, you're servants of the public. Right? In India, we're quite accustomed to having public sector banks. Right? Nothing unusual. And one reason the crash wasn't nearly so bad in India was precisely that the states were backed by the banks were backed by the state. There weren't any big runs on banks or any such thing. So these arguments will continue. Yes, we have a heavily financialized economy. We're no longer an industrial economy. We've ceased to be one within 25 years, 30 years. And it's been a grim process. Huge industries wiped out deliberately, partly because, I'm prepared to say this publicly, Margaret Thatcher hated the trade unions. She thought they'd got the Heath government out, which wasn't quite true, and decided that, very cleverly, very brilliantly, with the help of the press, effectively ensured that the trade unions are going to have to go a long way to get back to their former position. That's starting to happen. The unions have recently backed proportional representation for Westminster. They've realized, major unions, the ones which are affiliated to the Labour Party, have realized that we need a different electoral system to give us much better representation in Parliament. All of us, across the board. So it's a very good question you've raised. Don't just get your stuff from Google, read the analyses, read, say, the Guardian newspaper or the Financial Times. They give them, the Guardian's free access. The Independent, the British newspaper, limited free access. Read the analyses. If you like, I'll post them up. When I see good ones, I'll put them on the forum. Yeah. I hope my response has helped. You still with me? Yeah. Yes. And do some serious reading. There's plenty of excellent analyses around. Will Hutton in the Guardian, Larry Elliott as well. I don't always agree with him, but they're talking around the kinds of issues that you've raised. We still have a state benefit system, which is broadly liberal in conception. You need to qualify for it. If you have a certain level of savings or earnings, I think you don't qualify, and so on. And social care in England, particularly, means that if you have over a certain, if you have over a certain amount, you must sell your property or assets in order to qualify for free social care. Otherwise, you pay for it in your later age. In Scotland, social care is free, by the way, right, for every age group. So, the four countries, I mean, the three devolved nations and England have significantly different systems. Okay, anyone else like to raise anything?
Hello, sir. I again have a doubt.
Mm-hmm.
So in fascism, regarding the first week assignment, one of the questions was about a fascist leader, and the four options were: the first is embodies the will of the whole nation, expresses the publicly expressed wishes, policies of their population, is the symbol of national identity, and fourth one is a figurehead accepted and recognized by the other nation. What I understood is the symbol of national identity. But the correct answer is
you put in the answer you think is the right one. What do your classmates think?
I don't know. I didn't ask them, because the correct answer is embodies the will of the whole nation. I completely agree with that. But my point again is that in fascism, the idea of nation goes over to one leader. So if the leader shows what his nation is about, if I'm correct.
What does showing mean? Is that
For example, like his wishes, his dreams becomes the nation wishes and nation's dream.
okay? You're on the right lines, but what is the core of the core driver of action in all fascist theory? What is the core driver, the central sole driver of action? What is the only honest action?
Leader's will.
The will, right?
Yeah.
That is the only source of honest action. The will unrestricted by anything else. Right? That's fascist theory. So in that case, think about it. I mean, and have a look at the transcripts, have a look at the lecture again. Okay? When you answer the assignments, remember you can always consult the transcripts or the video or the book, right? These aren't, exam test conditions. So think about this. It's a good question that you've raised, right? Yes, the leader is the figure for the whole nation. What does that mean? Think about it.
Yes, so I got confused between the 2 points, which one would come first. But as again, the core point would be the will. I agree with that.
Okay, take a look at the book as well. Yep. Consult the book if you're in doubt, because with the assignments, I think you can resubmit them or take your time answering them.
But the assignment is very interesting.
I'm sorry?
Assignments questions are very interesting.
Oh, I'm glad you find that. They're quite they take quite a lot of work preparing. I mean, the TAs, the PhD students who are working with me, the 3 of them, excellent scholars. They wrote a lot of them. We all shared them out. But I'm glad you like them. I intended them to be questions such that it wasn't always possible to decide easily. With 1 or 2, I put in sort of absurd answers, really just to lighten the tone. And I hope
Yes,
you
so
find it.
they really test our knowledge in truest form.
That's very good to know. Do you think, once you've done the assignment, do you think that you know the subject better?
Yes, yes, sir.
It does sometimes make me think about my understanding of the concept, but after much going back and through, it does clarify my concepts in a much better way.
That's very good to know. Did anyone else want to add to that? Add to Zainab's point?
So, descriptive, like the final exam would be, I'm guessing, it would be much more challenging than the multiple choice tests. Okay,
well, I'll tell you the pattern of the exam. I will say it's really good to hear that you're finding the assignments worthwhile. I'll be completely honest, I have my doubts about multiple choice questions, but if you're finding them valuable, that's very valuable for me to know. The pattern of the final notice up on this. 2 papers, each divided into 2 sections. On each one, the first section is 50 questions, multiple choice, right? Covering the whole course, right? So 50 questions to start with, section A in both papers, 50 multiple choice questions. The section B, the section 2 in each paper, 2 essay questions. Right, don't panic. Anyone know where that comes from? Right, there's a book, a very, very funny series of science fiction, well, spoofs. They're funny novels based on a very funny radio program, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And the first thing it says is...
Sir, I am Subhas Roy from Kolkata, West Bengal. Earlier, I done from IIT Kharagpur 3 courses and 2 courses from Guwahati. This is the first time I am in Madras. And this is the first time there is no PPT. but the what do you say? Oh, your lecture is our what I say. We find our answers in assignment from your lectures and the writings there.
Right. Well, let me answer the question, please. It's good to hear from you. Answer the question. The pattern of the final exam.
Yeah.
50 multiple choice questions, section 2, 2 essays. Now, don't panic about the essays. Don't panic. There is a practice essay which I have prepared, which will be set. I'll set it in the next few days. You get about 3 weeks to do it. In fact, you'll get about 3.5 weeks. When I'm almost ready to send it in. And there are full and clear, strong suggestions. You can call them instructions if you like, on how to go about it. This is something I've learned from many years of teaching in India, that you're often, the students are very, very good with ideas, very good in discussion, as you are, all of you. But writing systematic analytical essays is something that people generally need practice in. By the way, the same thing's happening here in other parts of the world as well. So it's not just India, but my experience has been mainly of that in India. University students I've taught here have already done a lot of essays for their +2. And I've taught +2 and they've done a lot of essays for that. So they're more familiar with it. But I've given detailed advice on how to go about it and also how not to make it too burdensome for yourself. And I say that because I find writing a great burden myself. I always have. I'm trying to complete a paper for a colleague on language and language teaching. I have a professional teaching qualification and an English language qualification, teaching qualification. And I'm finding it, heavy going. Luckily, they're slightly later starting on the journey of this particular issue than I thought. So I've got an extra 10 days or so. But yes, I set essay practice and advice on approaching the essays, and I repeat this closer to exam time. So have a look at the practice essay. It's graded for 10% of the course. And I've given advice even on allocating your time and how to go about it. Yeah, like work reasonably short spells, don't overdo it, and so on. So I've set that. And that's the pattern of the exam, and I'll send a notice around on it, which I do every year anyway. I hope that helps.
Okay, sir.
Yep, hope that helps. If you still have queries, put them on the forum and I will answer them.
Yes, sir.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, by the way, this course is NPTEL, and it's a national program, and NPTEL put their programs in the IITs first to host them. So they're not run by IIT, but NPTEL is based on the IIT campus. Of course, I used to teach there, and my building was just opposite NPTEL, the building in which NPTEL had, I think, 2 floors, 2 office floors, so 1 or 2 floors. But that was just the IIT Madras office of NPTEL. It's now hosted all around India, millions of students. And we're very glad to see you there.
Sir, what is the relation between NPTEL and SIAM?
I don't know. Here's the answer, I'm afraid. NPTEL was set up, I think, about 10 or 12 years ago, perhaps 15, the National Program for Technology Enhanced Learning. I think it was about 15, but I really can't remember. No idea. So I don't know, I'm afraid. You might wish to look that up. Any other points you'd like to raise?
No, sir.
Okay, one of you has raised a point about current international affairs. Well, you're absolutely right. Well, diplomatic discussion. Well, we've had the warning signs since 2014. And I don't want to go into great detail. By the way, my father was an Indian Foreign Service officer. Came from a modest family background in southern India, Loyola College at Madras University, joined the Hindu, which I later worked for much later, and then went to Delhi, joined another paper, and then took the public UPSC exam and got in the Foreign Service. He was press wing, former journalist, and then became ambassador and high commissioner. So I grew up discussing a lot of international politics, even from the time I was quite young, 12, 13, even earlier than that, 10. And on the Hindu, I wrote editorials. I remember writing about the Russian annexation of eastern Ukraine, which is largely Russian speaking. As I saw it at the time, the Russian concern was to prevent, where they were very nervous about Ukrainian membership of NATO. And it also turned out, now at the time, you know, when people do things, they don't always know what the results will be. I thought that Gorbachev had been in a way let down because he didn't get a written undertaking that NATO would not expand eastwards. We mustn't forget that Russia and the Soviet Union have always been in a state of great nervousness about Western intentions or their relationship with the Western world, but nothing justifies what has been done here. And I mean absolutely nothing, and that's being said openly. We have seriously faced in Western Europe the possibility of an all-European or possibly world war. It's also been shocking the way the Western press have often reported the matter. Oh, these are white Europeans like us. Now that is racism. There is only one word for it, right? What about Iraq, which was illegal? What about Afghanistan? What about Libya, which was illegal? What about Syria? So people have said that here. A youngish man made a delivery to my house today, and he was saying the same thing. We're chatting, you know, on the doorstep for a few minutes. So he was really shocked. But one question we have to address is, if there were discussions, what were the assumptions behind them on both sides, on all sides? What were they supposed to achieve? And really, at present, what can we do to resolve the present situation? And that is going to cause, you know, think of the UN, a resolution the Security Council can't be put. Russia will veto it. China the other day abstained, right? Abstained. They didn't vote against or for, but they too are no doubt watching developments very, very closely, right? And this is, you know, the EU has acted very quickly, sanctions, and is becoming a geopolitical force in its own right. It's about time. I've always thought that. Not as a force for oppression, but as a significant authority founded on the idea of broadly social democracy. But I have no answers. If you have any, let me know, please. Yep. Oh, Zainab, you'd like to join the IFS? Well, I'm very glad to hear that. I hope you'll have a very successful, hope you'll get in, have a very successful career. I'm sure you will, right? Read the newspapers and read the quality press around the world. I've said this in the introduction to the course. Have you read the how to approach the course? Have you read that? Please read it. Yeah, I will. I've said read the serious press. In India, the news magazines are excellent. EPW, if you can get to it. The Hindu center page is particularly heavy. The other broadsheets are serious. They don't carry quite the same weight of things on the center page. In the rest of the world, Der Spiegel International, the German news magazine, published in English and in German, the same content in two different languages. Read the American press, the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, which has limited free access. The Guardian free access, the Independent limited access. Try the others as well. Many of them are paywalled. The FT is paywalled, I think. The Economist is probably paywalled. But you'll find a lot of things. I think Le Monde, the French paper, if you're familiar with the language, has, I used to get it on free access, and a thing called Le Monde Diplomatique, which is no longer free access. Really excellent analyses. Good, yes. Thanks, Sham. That's the link, how to approach the course. And I've talked about, it will help you with this course, but it'll also help you with other things that you do. Okay, time's gone by. Have I addressed your questions? If I haven't, put them on the forum, please. Okay, and Mr. Balaji, I'm sure, has things to do, and his technical colleagues. So our thanks to them. And we'll have maybe another couple of tutorials like this. If you've not found them helpful, let me know and tell me why, so that we can do something about it. Okay, well, good luck with the rest of the course, and keep putting your questions on the forum. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you, and look forward to meeting you another time if you can attend. These are entirely optional. Come along if you wish. Okay. Well, all the best to everyone. Take care. Take care. Thank you, Mr. Balaji. Many thanks.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay. All